All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. It's nice to know that we have that. Now we need to make a plan for a plan, right, Carl? Okay, discussion, next item, discussion and action on beautification efforts related to Bayfield Street project in 2024 and 2026, tab 5 of your packet. So this is a discussion and action, but I don't know if there's any specific action that's being proposed. So what I'd like to do is talk about who's in charge of beautification in the city and how does that all work. We have I say we, there is a beautification committee, which is a standalone nonprofit organization that has been extremely helpful with doing certain projects periodically. And then there's things that happen in other ways too, I think, sometimes, and I'm not even sure who's in charge of the decorations that happen at the sign coming into the city. You know, when the Easter decorations go up and the
Beautification.
Oh, beautification is, okay. So I don't know if we have a process for planning for beautification, but it would be kind of helpful if we did. And I don't know if the existing process, maybe there's already a process I'm not aware of, but it would be helpful to, and this is a good opportunity, I think, to do that and take a step back and look at what are the beautification efforts existing, what do we want to see in the future, and how do we make that all happen. There's all sorts of ideas, you know, that we could tackle. Of course, they all cost money, and that's where we look for help to a group like beautification with, in some instances, some things we can build in. As mentioned in the memo, we have that, you know, small amount of money every year that we are able to use from room tax that comes in towards that. And then hopefully we will have some dollars budgeted for the project, the highway project, that will help with some of that as well, like the decorative lighting. And so I don't know that we have to take any action tonight, but if anyone has any items that you'd like to discuss regarding beautification, now is the time to bring them up.
Well, I guess I'll start with Christmas lights. We're getting new poles with power on them for Christmas lights. I have no idea how much municipal Christmas lights cost. I'm sure they're fairly pricey. Do we have any idea what they are?
It's going to run the gamut depending on what you want.
Well, right, like on an average, is it $2,000 $1,000 of ornament? I don't know.
I really couldn't guess right now.
Not a big deal, but
But it's something we'll want to look at for sure.
yeah. So I mean, one idea I had was that we would have like an adopt a pole program. I mean, I know that there's just for my family, there's probably 3 or 4 poles that we would adopt. Business-wise, you know, I mean, if for instance, if it's $1,000 a Christmas ornament, would the city be opposed to putting some, rather than paying for a Christmas ornament, paying for a brass placard or something that would go on the pole? You know, I know we have some sort of issue with putting people's names on things, or naming things after people. But you know, even if the city didn't pay for the placard, you know, I could go along and think, you know, just adopted a pole for $1,000. A business could do it, family. That's one way to raise the money. And getting off of Christmas lights in the summer, having planters, since we're not going to have decorative brick stamped colored concrete anymore, if we could get planters, and the trick is, to get everyone all on the same page, so the city would have to choose a planter style, and then have that struck, and again, I think maybe the businesses could kick in and pay for some of that out in front of their store.
I think you're talking about ground level though.
Yeah,
and
just
hanging.
small,
Okay.
small planters
Yeah.
on the sidewalk area, that would have to be then removed, in the fall before snow plowing and that kind of thing.
And that, are you thinking that would be maintained by the city?
I think the businesses need to kick in.
The businesses could adopt a planter to take care of it.
Sure,
And that's something where the chamber could potentially get involved, in helping with that. But it takes coordination
Right.
and,
I
Just
think-
speaking from experience, we did those wooden ones years ago. We used the material from the docks that were pulled out, and we sold them to the businesses to maintain, and everything was for free. All they had to do is put plants in them and maintain them. So there's got to be, I'm hoping the times are changed. I certainly am, but,
Weeds would get involved, right? If it's growing weeds rather than flowers.
right.
well, and we kind of have that issue already with sidewalks and weeds.
Right.
Because it's really up to the property owner to maintain the weeds, am I correct? And that doesn't always happen already. So anything we're talking about, some things more than others are going to require some effort and coordination from someone. And that's where we should definitely make sure that Public Works is part of the discussion, whatever it is that we come up with that we want.
Along with those decorative planters, I don't see why we couldn't have some decorative benches that could be removed in the fall so that they wouldn't get destroyed from falling in the snow. I mean, that would help. You could put one of those planters alongside the bench.
Mm-hmm.
Make it more welcoming for people to
Yeah.
walk and sit and
Yeah,
stay
if we
and
could
talk.
if we could do 2 on, per block, I mean, that should be.
With some brownstone features on the benches. City's got a whole block full of brownstone curving.
Oh, right.
That the football field,
Uh-huh.
that we could tear up and put new curb in.
Karen?
I want
Hey,
to circle back.
Dave, Dave's very difficult to understand, so Dave, if you could maybe speak up a little bit. Mary, I can hear you fine now, but Dave, you're hard to understand.
All right,
Pretend like the microphone's not right in front of you and you're still projecting.
practically in my mouth.
But you're a whisperer.
Right.
All right, Karen?
Well, I wanted to circle back to the Christmas decoration issue. I know that the beautification committee has had some initial discussion about what might be some Christmas decoration options, and I think they were even pricing some of those out. I don't know what the prices are at this point in time, but clearly it seems to me that the city and or others who are interested in that decoration probably needs to coordinate and sit down with beautification committee and see what their scope is and what they're willing to do and ready to do, and go from there in terms of, those are great ideas, I think, in terms of planters and benches, the logistics of maintenance and consistency of maintenance is always an issue, of course, but it would seem to me that maybe a first step would be to have that conversation with the beautification committee to see what, because I know they've been talking about, at least they've been talking about Christmas decorations. I don't know what else they've been talking about.
Sure. So this is a good time for some of those ideas to come out. And if anybody is interested in helping to coordinate that discussion, at some point we'll have to have,
Hey,
I think, go ahead, Jen.
Well, first of all, I think thanks for putting this on the agenda. And I think that we've touched on this subject a couple times, and I think it's kind of all encompassing, like, in terms of, we have like one shot here, right? When we're doing our downtown and we're getting new sidewalks and streetlights to kind of have our look. And I've been getting some feedback from some business owners downtown too that want to paint their building, but they don't even know what color to paint it because again, we don't have our look of what we want our town to look like. So I think I actually think it's a pretty big endeavor to coordinate. And I don't know the best path, Madam Mayor, but I was toying with the idea of, and I hate to say it, like a subcommittee to work with the beautification committee or the parks committee.
Yeah.
Maybe this is something the parks committee can do and then bring
Sure.
back to council. Because what we don't want, I'm sorry, I don't want another like deal that happened with the light posts where we went back and forth and did a survey. And I just think it would be really great if we had some kind of a committee where we got business owners, members of the public who are, interested, and maybe it's like, maybe it's the Parks Committee, I don't know. But I feel like this is a really good step of starting to coordinate it because in 2 years, when we get everything done, or 3 years now, right? Is it 3 years? Yeah. That we just want to be ready, right? You unveil it, you have all your planters, and you're ready. So, and I know it's probably not the biggest topic for some people, but it's actually kind of what everybody's going to see,
Right.
It's
a very visible
So-
thing, yeah.
In working with the beautification committee, because they've done such great work in the town already, in working with them and assisting and kind of doing a collaborative effort.
I think you're right, Jen. I think we are going to need, I have it written down here, ad hoc subcommittee question, which,
I agree.
in some instances like this, I think it is going to be necessary because it's going to be something that there are multiple parties involved in Parks Committee, the council, Public Works, beautification, and the chamber, all really should be part of that discussion. So somehow we'll have to figure out how we can do that. I don't know if we need to make an official ad hoc subcommittee, which could be an action item, or Mary?
I don't know if Jen would want to do, a question with the park committee, but for me, and I think most of you all know, there's too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes. So I think it would be nice to have an already organized, in place committee such as the parks to take the lead on it so that, no offense to any possible groups, but you'd hate to see group to group battling for any one thing. And if they are in charge, then they're in charge and the input is, again, cooperative and coordinated, but under an already sitting existing group.
What is the exact charge of the Parks Committee? Do we need to look at that to see if this falls within that?
Well, roughly, the Parks Committee is to review park policies and plans for just parks. There is no actual recreation component or any other component. So if the council wants to assign this task to the Parks Committee, you're basically just amending their charge or giving them this special task if that is what you want them to do. So,
Wouldn't this be better suited for the planning commission?
It's another option for
I
sure.
mean, so are we considering designing framework that business owners can refer to understand what color to paint their buildings and what trim and that kind of thing?
No, I don't think so. Yeah,
Right.
no, I don't think
Well, I
so.
mean, I'm an advocate for that. I mean, it works when you don't have crazies on there that want to tell you what windows you can put in. But to design a look and understand what you what's required of, the only way towns look cute is when,
By design.
by design.
Yeah.
They don't end up that way with 100 people doing 100 different things.
Right, and we do have an awful lot of brown on our main street.
Right.
I know brownstone is great and all, but it does look a little,
And I guess to be clear, I'm not necessarily advocating for an architectural review board where we, you know, want to maintain a certain era. But,
we could have recommended colors
yes,
without being a, you know. So it's a thought. So is there, I guess we kind of did discussion before there was a motion because I didn't know what a motion might look like, but does someone have a motion they'd like to make about this, Tom?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to send this to the planning commission. I think that would be the best way to go with this, on the decorative, the benches and planters.
so would we create a subcommittee of the planning commission with the beautification committee and
What would that look like if the plan commission were in charge or the parks committee or whatever? That would just have to be an agenda item, and then you would invite those parties to speak to that item and participate in it. So, so whichever one you choose. So
I'm
you're
choosing
suggesting the plan
Yes.
commission. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Tom and a second by Dave to add beautification to the plan commission's tasks. Is that an accurate way to describe that? Karen? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just a question in terms of process, does that preclude then a discussion outside of the plan commission in terms of ideas and thoughts? I mean,
No, I would say no. I mean, your own group anyone's group can discuss whatever they'd like within their own, and then bring those to the plan commission, because I think the plan commission will be looking for input, and that's the point of it. But and they would even look for a proposal, and then the plan commission could recommend that proposal to council.
I'm just cognizant of the work that beautification has done, and that they not feel that, you know, they're being, you know, ignored or not valued in terms of the work they've done and the ideas that they have not formulated in an official way, but been thinking about, because they have done well.
I think what we're trying to do is take that valued work and incorporate it into a process that also involves others that should probably be part of that discussion. Is what it
That's the way I see it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
Any other questions or discussion on beautification? Otherwise, you can look for that item on a plan commission, future plan commission meeting potentially. Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Thanks, everyone. And I think it is only in 2 years that we're going to be up and running here with phase 1 anyway. And this is going to be a little awkward, just as a side note. Going forward, we're going to have phase 1 complete and then a lag before phase 2 is complete. So there's going to be a little bit of a disjointed process, but it is what it is, and at least we'll start with part and we'll finish it off with the second phase. Okay, our next item is discussion and action on ordinance 22-006 to amend the beer garden size requirements, and that is tab 6 of your packet. So we have a memo on this, and Plan Commission has talked about it and recommended the 75% increase, the increase to 75%, I should say, of the internal space to be allowed for a beer garden. I am not, I did ask Tony what the timeline was for how this works, and it apparently a beer garden permit is a one-time application that a business makes for a small fee, and then that is just done and in perpetuity as long as they follow the rules. That just stays in effect. Correct, Tony?
Maybe. As I was further researching this, I did find within our files that beer garden permits were issued in 2003, and there's two I found, in 2005. They were specific to a location and a time frame, a weekend, much like what we do for temporary extensions of premise. And then I didn't find any changes or things of this ordinance, of the beer garden ordinance, until like 2011. So there was a change that took place there as well. But I don't have any history as such. Currently on our fee schedule, we don't have a beer garden fee listed. So at some point, it disappeared. When we've been renewing alcohol licenses, if they have an outdoor premise, then, I mean, it's just part of their licensing fee. There's no additional fee for that. So as I was looking at this, and then I had a discussion with Max earlier today, I think there are a couple changes that we should make with this, like to eliminate the fee, because it doesn't seem to make much sense if it's a one-time fee. If it's a business, you know, if it's an establishment in the business district, they already have to go to the plan commission for certain parts of zoning, like if there's fencing and stuff like that. So there's already another approval process there. The other thing that I've been thinking about is we also have approved the golf course to serve alcohol on their golf course, which is way more than 50% or 75% of the physical premise. So we need to have some type of, I guess, amendment or something that identifies leisure facilities, unlike a bar. And Max and I had this discussion as well earlier. So I don't know if Max have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so the statutes don't require that a premise be limited to the inside space. City and the ordinances can define what that premise is. So the way that this has been being used, I think, as Tony has discovered, is that once people apply for this beer garden or to serve outside, that kind of gets lumped into their premise that they're licensed to sell in. What the purpose of this is to limit the amount of area, or somewhat control the amount of area outside that these entities can have included in their premise. Statutes do require the premise to be owned by the license holder. So you couldn't have the premise be your neighbor's yard as well. It has to be within that lot. But we can set whatever types of regulations that council desires for outdoor space that's allowed. When this first came up, I think there was some discussion about just essentially letting the applicant propose some size that they wanted, and then having the council decide, or city staff decide on a case-by-case basis whether that's appropriate. And we wanted some uniform standard as to how we can treat different license holders somewhat similarly with the amount of outdoor space that they're awarded or allowed to use. That's why, rather than eliminating the minimum or the maximum requirement of the outdoor space, we propose raising it somewhat. There were a couple other areas in the ordinance that we discovered that are somewhat internally inconsistent. So Tony and I were recommending and talking about having a discussion about this, as well as likely the next agenda item. And rather than passing any ordinance revision tonight, get those into more of a comprehensive, deal with all of these issues at once to be enacted at the next meeting.
So the only thing, if we do wait, is that we're delaying a business from being able to utilize the space that they're hoping to utilize, now that the weather is turning.
Because council did approve the COVID temporary extension.
We're still under that?
That is still in effect.
Okay.
And I would then recommend, and I was planning to do this anyway, like in the July meeting, that council rescind that. But right now, it's still in place. So that wouldn't necessarily affect our neighbor right now.
Okay, Carl?
I move to table ordinance 22006 until the June meeting. I'll second that.
Okay, motion to table by Carl, second by Tom.
So if we table, he's in the process of constructing a fence, right? He doesn't know.
How big to make the fence?
Right.
It's done.
It's
It's
done.
done.
So the fence, is it all the way up now?
Did he stick with his original plan?
Mm-hmm.
Because he wanted to make it larger. I don't know if he.
He extended.
So for now, he's able to use it with the extension of premises, and then depending on what we decide, then he might have to, and I think he knew that going in, that might be a thing. So that,
And as far as that goes, we would like to have a little discussion and see if everyone's still on board with the 75%. If that's the general consensus, then yes, we're not looking to pull the rug out from under on that issue.
That's what I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's not the intent of postponing this. It's just to make sure that there are some other areas that we found that were inconsistent with this.
okay, Tom?
I don't have a problem with 75% this area, but we have other ones that they decide they want to have a beer garden at 75%. That's a whole nother story.
Well, just to chime in on that, it still has to follow the zoning and that sort of thing. So I think that's going to self-regulate a little bit in that regard. Did you have something?
Yes, there's one thing Tony and I discussed. Currently, we don't allow parking lots to be an outdoor service area. Like input on that, our thought is continue with that, not allowing parking lots to be included in that outdoor area. So that would limit a lot of the usable space as well as keeping order in what could be included in that premises.
Is that current parking lots or is that required parking lots?
I think areas used for parking is what my interpretation of that is, but.
But if an owner wants to not make it parking anymore.
Theoretically, they could take away their parking if it's not required by the zoning. Another related item here, and this is something that I was going to ask if the permit process would include a requirement that the outdoor serving area would be in visual proximity by the bartender, which is something that I know our chief was hoping that would be somewhere official, I think. And I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Ken, or if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, the motion is to table it for now so we can have more discussion about all those details and components of what that
The way
looks
that's set up right now, that one they can see.
Correct. And then, the other thing that I think is, I can't remember if it's in our ordinance or if it's I think it's in our ordinance where it says it just has to be visually demarcated. And so to have that maybe approved by the police chief or by the plan commissioner, somehow that maybe needs to get fine-tuned a little bit. So, motion is to table. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, our next item is discussion on conceptual ordinance to relax open container requirements in the city, which is tab 7 of your packet. And I think there was a question in the memo about if there was any difference between beer and hard liquor under this ordinance. When I read it, it seemed like it was all encompassing. And I don't know if you found out anything different. Yeah.
No,
So it'd be any beer or wine or hard liquor, any intoxicating beverage.
that's what, yes.
Which kombucha is not, correct?
No, anything that's under 0.5% alcohol is considered, is not, doesn't fall within the scope of these.
Okay, very good. So this is just a discussion on a conceptual ordinance to relax open container requirements throughout the city. Anyone have any thoughts on that they'd like to share?
And the discussion could be throughout the city, certain areas, but
Sure.
not just like everywhere in the city, but it could be
Sure.
parks or certain areas of wherever. That's what we're hoping for the discussion.
Here.
I guess I'm confused, and I know that Councilor Anderson asked for this item to be put on the agenda, so I guess I'm looking to Dave for some insight in terms of what he believed we needed to accomplish with a conceptual discussion of a different ordinance.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
but I wanted to clarify, before we get into that, my understanding is that those establishments that are Class B liquor licenses are not to allow patrons to leave with a distilled beverage unless an ordinance expressly allows it.
Yes, they cannot take it out of there, but relaxing this would also allow, if you had your own intoxicating beverages, not taken out of a licensed premises. This would apply to that too.
So I'm just going to share briefly a situation that I encountered a couple of weeks ago. So I was driving home for lunch, and I stopped at the stop sign here, and a woman was crossing in front of me. So I waited for her, and I noticed that she had a beer in her hand, and she looked like maybe she had been drinking some beer. And so I thought, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be walking down the street with a beer. So I called the police, and they stopped the woman, and they poured the beer out, and so we have just something to think about. That in looking at the guidelines for this, and the timing and our placement is something that should be considered, because normally, if we had an open container law in the city, throughout the city, I wouldn't have been able to call the police and get that taken care of. And I don't know if anything more came of it, if there were anything else involved, but just something to think about.
Other than walking down the street with a beer, was she doing anything wrong, other than that?
Not that I knew of. I don't know if the police found anything else, but.
I'd love to walk around the block with a beer in my hand, you know?
Tell us more about that.
Well, I mean, I don't really see the issue. I mean, I really don't. You can get drunk in your house and then go out and be just as intoxicated as you could be if you're carrying one with you. And not that I'm advocating for, the whole town to, start walking around with drinks in their hand, but I really don't see the issue. I don't think it's going to be a problem. If it was a problem, I don't think people that are prone to alcoholism and that kind of thing, they're probably already, walking around with a flask in their pocket, or I don't know if it's going to create any more problems, quite honestly. And the reason I bring this up is because I would like Duluth and any other restaurant that wants to have a little bistro table outside of their store or their restaurant for one of their patrons to walk outside in the summer, sit at their table outside and wait for a table and have a beer. And without, maybe we can currently do that, I'm not sure. If they're not able to do that, then I would advocate that we change the ordinance.
Are you hearing from businesses that they want to do that?
Why, no, but I think it's evident. Duluth has a couple of tables outside their store, and why wouldn't someone want to walk outside and?
An expansion of the beer garden. And, I think about being in Hayward as soon as you go down that main one. And they've got a beautiful patio there with everybody. It happens to be in front of the restaurant. I would say beer garden is more appropriate in terms of expanding that space. I would be adamantly opposed to open drinking I would love to see the little things outside the front, I get that. But on a whole, I just don't know that that's the look we want.
I don't know, but like I said, I don't know. I don't know if it would be an issue. I think you can legally do a lot of things, and people don't do them.
I know, but honestly, as a bartender for over 30 years, I think this is the grand Pandora's box. I really do. I really do. There's people that you cut off, and they're going to grab their drink, and they're going to be sliding down the sidewalk. I'm not sure at any point during the day would I like to see that. The other thing with some of that too, and I don't know if you could go with part of this, but God forbid something happens. You don't know if they're going back to the bartender for over serving, or if that person's been scouring. They could do it at home, you're granted. But I don't know, with all physical beautification that we're going after, I can think of a dozen people in my head right now that would be sloppy drunks on Bayfield Street. I do. And I think the beer garden can address those. Number one, they're going to be restricted by the size of their property, that's for sure. But that's why we gave, when we cut smoking out, when smoking wasn't allowed in bars anymore, that's when most of these places went and expanded so they can have their smoking clients be out there. Now, if they want them to be out in the yard, say, I think the beer garden takes care of that. It's not necessary to have 2 little tables and 3 little tables in front to look cutesy when they can be right there, say Duluth, depending on how they own that property, to expand that way. Open container, I think, is just number one, I don't think it's a good look, and I don't know that it's a healthy perception for a community that wants to bring in families and children and support a school district to say, oh yeah, and you can walk up and down Bayfield any hour of the day and drink booze, wine, or beer, I just don't see it. Hey, as somebody that would love to participate, sure. But if you talk about the West End Park or Memorial Park and where it's restricted to either the campsites and the pavilion, thank you. Everybody's walking around down there anyway. Technically, you could get them. So if you want to address those changes, I'm all for it. Not sure I want Wickdall and Flag Park either to go that way, but some of the ones that make more sense, certainly. I don't know that big.
And I think that's a good discussion to have. Like, are there things that make sense specifically that wouldn't necessarily be just the whole city all the time? Does anyone else have comments or questions? We have the chief here if anybody wants to ask any specific questions.
Can we currently sit in a park with a cooler of beer? No.
And one of the situations that I've been thinking about since COVID is everyone is having to, taking their stuff to go. So if you get a meal in town and you take it to go and you want to eat it in the park, you can't have a beer with it, which when people are on vacation, they probably want to. That would, that's one situation that maybe, but then what, how do you restrict that when you're saying in the park? Like, would it be certain times of the day? I don't know. And I guess I have a question for the chief, and that is, do you know other cities that have open intoxicants that either do or don't have problems? Are there other?
I don't know of any, at least remotely close to us, that allow it. I can't say there's not some that do.
This is Carl.
When I lived in Madeline Island, they had open containers, and I can't tell you the problems that created.
In law enforcement ways and ambulance ways?
Yes. Public nuisance ways.
Is that still in effect,
I'm not sure if it's still in effect, but it was when I lived out there, and on a Sunday morning, drunks were laying everywhere.
I really don't think Washburn's gonna be crawling with drunks, on the street if they're walking around with a beer in their hand. I really don't. But.
I mean, and if the council wants to, I'm sure you could always give it a shot and see what happens. But the question is that what the council wants?
I mean,
and that's why we're having this
This
discussion.
doesn't excuse being drunk in public. I mean, do we have, is there being drunk in public? Is there an ordinance on that?
You could have a partner ordinance.
The only thing it might be is disorderly conduct if the person's causing a problem, but there's no public intoxication laws or anything in the state of Wisconsin.
I'd prefer to address the campground parks and say the ballpark, because I know people enjoy cold beer when they're down there at hot games, so I will speak to that. But as far as it would go for citywide or Bayfield Street, I would be strong.
If someone was passed out, out here by the fountain, what would you do?
Can I address some of this?
Sure.
Am I free to talk?
Absolutely. You're here for this item, so please come on up.
Well, I'll start by saying I'm completely against it. Because I think it's going to encourage, I think it could encourage or lead to easier underage drinking. Right now, we have the bars. We have the bar, the outside drinking areas, the beer gardens. And the bartenders regulate all that stuff. So if you're letting everybody do it on Main Street, now I have to regulate it. And to be honest, I don't have the time. You got what your image of nice little bistro tables and people having a glass of wine, yeah, that's great. But what I'm going to see is people at night, the fishermen that come here and stay in the hotels, the snowmobilers, they're going to be walking up and down Main Street with their beers, crumpling them up, throwing them in the yards. That is the reality of what's going to happen. So.
What about like the sidewalk cafe that's in the packet? If there were an ordinance like that allowed a deluge, and that's the only one that I can think of off the top of my head, because it has to be, in this particular instance, more than 50% of their business revenue from the sale of food. I mean, I don't know, maybe taxis, I don't know how much theirs is. Would that sort of a thing be easier to regulate?
I'm not terribly opposed to something like that, regulating in front of a specific business or something. But is it necessary when you already have a beer garden?
Sure.
We don't have the long waits for tables and businesses like they do in Duluth and such. So we don't need places for people to sit outside and drink other than the beer gardens. As far as I'm
Hopefully
concerned.
that will change.
That would be nice.
Yeah. Tom?
Back in the 70s, there was like 3 or 4 beer gardens on Main Drag in Dayton. And I'll quote, because I remember to this day what Chief Sheehan had to say. He says, that is the biggest damn mistake. He says, I'm writing more tickets to minors for drinking there, getting the alcohol. I think there's one left now. Because Uncle Al's used to have one, there was one by Carbolis's, and then there was one a little farther up, and then the town had that one.
So even from the beer gardens
They were having a
there,
problem.
it was
Yeah.
kind of,
So, I mean, this is, coming from a viewpoint of businesses that don't necessarily have the room for a beer garden. Like Duluth, they don't have much room at all. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm simply trying to figure out a way that we can accommodate some of our guests in that flow through town here in a more hospitable way. And I'm for the record, I'm not advocating for everyone in town to be driving or walking around with alcohol. I don't know if we can regulate just in front of businesses, I would be fine for
Next,
Mhm.
did we do like the street bistro in front of these businesses like Duluth?
Yeah,
Regulate that?
yes, that could be done. We could change ordinances to allow and incorporate that.
That I would be fine with. That would help their business. There's not a long, super long, as of yet, super long wait for tables and all that. And we'll see what's gonna happen once these tourists start popping in from that
But
cruise ship.
I would hope we'd make it clear that, we don't want people just standing out front of Patsy's with beers in their hand. And if you've got a table or something that they want to sit and wait. I mean, I'm not really for it, to be honest. I think it's a bad idea. I think it doesn't look good. But I just don't want to have people thinking that, I can stand outside and drink today.
Exactly. What's the difference if I'm standing versus a table 2 doors down?
Yeah.
And you said you have not been, nobody's addressed you yet to bring this up. Do you even know who owns the lot and how much of it between Duluth and Patsy's? I mean, Duluth and Carlin's. The other thing too is Duluth does not have an official bartender. Their servers serve a bottle of wine. So if you're looking for a visual, Duluth doesn't have that. So that sort of takes them out of the running a bit. I mean, Patsy's has the vision, Firehouse has the vision, even Nichols with the door open has visual, but Duluth wouldn't have that. So,
Neither would the snub.
and the snug either, but the snug utilizes already fully most of what they have outside of that door. So.
are there other things that you were thinking of where there could be places where we might want to make any adjustments in an ordinance? Anyone? Mary, you mentioned down at the park.
Yeah.
Potentially.
The 2 parks and the ball field.
And I'll be honest, I see people fishing at the Cold Dock drinking beer. And
Oh, that's
I don't
true,
bother
That's
them.
all the time.
Yeah, I don't bother them.
That's
because-
another spot.
Is there anything else?
Just so I
Jen, go ahead.
follow, can you tell me exactly now where we're at and what kind of adjustment to the ordinance we're looking at?
There's no
I'm having a hard
proposal.
time following.
There's no proposal at this time specifically for anything, I don't think. It's just a discussion. Unless someone has anything specific that they're requesting, I guess, gets worked on for a conceptual ordinance change that I caught wind of. Is there anything specific? And that's kind of what I was getting at. Are we looking at the parks at all specifically? And when I say that, I mean the campgrounds or
Ballpark and now
ballpark,
yeah.
Cold Dock. Or do we just leave it as is with the knowledge that if it becomes a problem, it can actually be dealt with because it says you can't. But deal with it in a relaxed fashion where if it's not really a problem, like someone fishing on the Cold Dock, as long as they're not causing a problem, they're not going to really enforce that necessarily. It's kind of nice to have that in your back pocket so that you can enforce it if you need to.
What are the policies of the marina? On their own boat, okay.
Out by the barbecue place.
Not at the pavilion there?
Yeah, they drink the beer, the wine and the wine.
See, I think there's a lot of drinking that's going on anyway in public. It's just not an issue. You know, I think we have this vision that we're turning into, 1920s New York, where, we have a bunch of winos hanging around. I really don't think, I don't know. I mean, I get the underage drinking thing, and I would refer to Chief Johnson's expertise in this matter, and I mean, I can back off, I guess, but I think we should really think about what is already currently going on. People are drinking at the coal dock, they're drinking in the campgrounds, at their campers.
And that's allowed.
Right, and
Well, when everybody used to be down there at 4th of July in those great big parties, I'm sure you were probably at some of them. I mean, there's like that corner that now is all ripped up with that ditch there. There used to be 150, maybe 200 people there every 4th of July. It was like 5 families, 6 families. I don't know if your family was down there. The zip codes, all of them. And then drinking and nothing. Unless they caught a kid drinking, then there was a problem. But I mean, law enforcement didn't bother with that. Nobody was running around being stupid.
I'll give you an example. When Book Across the Bay, when we allowed open container down there, it used to be that you could bring your own in, or you could buy from them. It was, the whole park was open. We ended up with lots of Northern College people all out there drinking by the fire. So we had a lot of problems. That's where we ended up having to change it to can't carry anything in. You have to have wristbands or whatever and buy from them, because that was our way to regulate it. Once you allow it for anybody to bring their own stuff in, it's so hard to regulate. When you get a group of people sitting in a park, and 3 of them are of age and one's not, I mean, I don't have time to sit there and wait and see if he's drinking beer with them. He's gone. I think it's going to lead to a lot of open containers in cars. People are going to be more likely to go get in their car with their beer.
Move the table subject.
Do we need to? It was just a discussion. I think we can just end our discussion. And if anybody wants to bring anything specific forward, they can, request anything specific for action on another agenda. All right? All right. Excellent. Good discussion. Thanks, everybody. Okay, we'll move on then to our discussion and action on notice of annual alcohol license renewal. Speaking of alcohol.
Mayor, I would move approval of the renewal list for publication, authorizing staff to begin their administrative process.
Motion by Karen and second by Carl. Any questions, comments, or discussion? Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Sorry, Jen, cut you off there. Motion carries.
I'm sorry, this is Laura. Could you just repeat the motion? I really had a hard time hearing it.
Sure. The motion was to send the alcohol license renewals on for publication.
And staff to begin the administrative review.
Did you hear that, Laura?
Okay.
And staff?
Yes, not well, but I think I got it, so thank you. I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, very good. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Now that it's approved. So, something that I do have in this memo is in regards to the limited number of hard liquor or the Class B licenses that we have.
Uh-huh.
So, as you know from the past year, there is demand for the limited license that we have. And there are a few establishments that, according to our ordinance, aren't necessarily meeting up to the alcohol ordinance. Those being their hours of operation or when they're open. So specifically, if an establishment is closed or they're not serving for 180 consecutive days, or more than half of the year within a year's period, council does have the ability to take those licenses away. And I just want to point out that because we are quoted by the state of what we have, having these licenses are a privilege, not a right. And this is something that I think we need to start addressing because we do have a demand, apparently. And just as a point of fact, just over a year ago, when I found an additional license that nobody knew that we had, it was because the council used this measure to take away the hard liquor license from the broke down because they weren't using it. And then it was forgotten about. So it's something that I think we need to be cognizant of in the future moving forward as we issue these licenses.
So Tony, would we be able to kind of do a reset with the new licensure year that's coming up? Obviously, we have relaxed that enforcement because of COVID and trying to give businesses a break to help them get through. But maybe that would be something that we could put in a memo attached to paperwork for the next license, that a notice that will begin enforcing our own ordinance now that we feel that the COVID measures have relaxed enough where they should be able to now be open. Something like that. Does that sound okay to everyone that we do that?
I'm just thankful you brought it up, because there's that one business that's been sitting for a number of years on a license doing nothing, and just because he hates us all does not mean we don't enforce our ability to take care of that. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Tom?
I don't know if this is, there's a rumor or it's fact. I was told, I know what you're talking about, that he gave the business, his daughter and future son-in-law or son-in-law are going to run the theater, so it's supposedly supposed to be open. That's what I had heard.
Yeah, and I had also heard that, so we'll see. And you know, we'll, by making official notice that, you know, we now are, we're considering ourselves post-COVID when we rescind that relaxation.
Put them on notice.
Yeah, yeah. And it's time, and I think that is a good point. And obviously, we have a new business that can utilize a license. And so if someone isn't going to utilize theirs, it's time for us to enforce that. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Then, speaking of alcohol, we have discussion and action on request to allow for open container on Harborview Event Center property and the city-owned portions of the Omaha block immediately to the north, as well as Harborview Drive in between, for the North Coast Car Show on July 30th from 9 a.m. until 9 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mary, second by Karen. This is that very specific time frame sort of situation that I think everyone seems to be okay with. Any questions, comments, or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And with that, I would look for a motion to adjourn since we didn't table one of our items.
I move that meeting be adjourned.
And second by Tom. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Long overdue.
Recording stopped.